Hello, I'm Clifford Bradley and welcome to today's Composer to Composer discussion, brought to you by the Australian Guild of Screen Composers. Now, just before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to tell you a little story if I may. The date was July 25th, 1988, and it was World Expo in Brisbane, Australia. I got to the gates early that day and I raced straight to the river stage where I reserved my spot and camped out all day for the John Farnham concert that evening. In his star-studded band was one of my musical heroes, Mr. David Hirschfelder, on keyboards. Now, I was only a young musician at the time. I think I'd been playing guitar for about 2 years or so that concert left a lasting impression on me. Fast forward 30 years or so, and I had the very great privilege of getting to work with Mr. Hirschfelder as an orchestrator and doing score preparation on several of his film scores, including Ride Like a Girl, the directorial debut by renowned Australian actor and filmmaker Rachel Griffiths. So it's a great honour to have with us and a very warm welcome to Mr. David Hirschfelder.
Thank you so much, Cliff. It's a pleasure to talk to you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, even when it's some ungodly hour when we're discussing a last-minute orchestration for a film.
While we're sort of back in that era, the 80s, which I sort of feel was a real golden era for Australian pop music. You were obviously involved in some of the big pop bands and also some, jazz fusion group like Pyramid. So how would being in groups like Pyramid and playing for John Farnham and Little River Band, how do you feel that shaped your sound and your approach to writing film music?
Definitely, it was a fantastic, in hindsight, not knowing this at the time, but it was an incredible training ground and a natural part of my evolution as a screen composer. I mean, I always wanted to be a screen composer. I remember at a very young age watching movies and enjoying the grand sweeping themes from the old movies, particularly, and thinking that would be, I'd love to do that when I grow up. And then I found myself in bands like Little River Band and John Farnham, and prior to that, at my own fusion band, Pyramid. And it was really all connected because in the sort of jazz genre, of course, it's all about improvisation. And there's a strong connection between improvisation and composition. I mean, someone wisely said, composition is just improvisation slowed down and edited. And largely, I think that training ground that you spoke of in the 80s, being part of a vibrant industry, taught me professionalism and skills in what presses an audience's button. And those experiences have really helped shape and inform how I try and create a communicable piece of music that enhances the score and presses the audience's buttons, hopefully.
So I guess while we're talking about these sort of old scores, what would you say is your favorite, all-time favorite film score? Do you have one even?
Well, I do actually. If I had to pick one, I don't like picking one because there's so many great ones. I mean, I love many of Thomas Newman's and John Williams' scores, as well as Danny Elfman and the newer composers like Danny Bensi. But anyway, there's so many wonderful composers around, but I think my favorite all-time score, if I had to pick one, is The Mission by Ennio Morricone. I think that for me happened at a time when I was literally just about to embark on my film score, having been a contemporary performing musician, a classically trained. And I think when I heard that score, everything came together and it just lit up my brain, my heart. It ignited my passion for, the fact that it combines so many genres and so skillfully and has so much heart and soul as well as great craftsmanship. I just think it's a stunning masterpiece of the 20th century music, regardless of the fact whether it's as a standalone piece of music, it's incredible.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's also one of my favorites as well. And I think it's interesting that, and in some ways, and this doesn't happen very often, but in some ways that score has become more famous than the actual film.
Yes, correct.
And yes, a favorite concert piece of orchestras for people that haven't even seen the film, but they know the music and they love it. And that as you know, doesn't happen that often with film music. That it sort of transcends.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So it was I guess, was it a natural progression? You were sort of playing and, playing some big gigs and doing a lot of touring and all of that sort of thing. Was it a fairly natural progression to then go into film music? Tell us about that sort of time.
Well, I mean, I was knocking on doors in the very early 80s, even before I was playing in the Little River Band, and which led on to me working with the wonderful John Farnham, who is a great cherished part of my career. But prior to that, I was knocking on doors, but because I was so young and had no score on the board, I suffered from the quite often experienced catch-22 syndrome, where you can't get a gig until you've got a gig. But ironically, one day, a friend of mine happened to be sharing a house with a film director. And I used to make cassette tapes. Remember those old things? I used to make cassette tapes of my works and give to friends. And it was just like to get their response, and just because I like writing music in between playing music. And one day a director happened to hear one of my cassettes and said, who's that? That's really interesting music. I want that. That'd be perfect for the documentary I'm working on. And this friend of mine said, well, he happens to be the musical director of John Farnham. And I'm sure he'd be interested in talking to you about your film. So that's how I got my first break in 1987.
We're going to focus a little bit on the score to Ride Like a Girl, which I loved the film. I thought there was a lot of heart in it. It felt like a film that had just been created with a lot of love from all sides. So why don't we listen to the opening titles? I'm going to start it from about 2 minutes in. This cue, to me, it sounds quite simple in a lot of ways and quite sparse, but it's actually quite an intricate cue. There's a lot of detail, from the bouncy 5/8 rhythm to the intricate string tremolos and harmonic divises. And as you know, David, we spent quite a bit of time getting those all right. Anyway, let's have a listen.
Mum, Bridge, stay with me. Stay with me. That's a good boy. He's a good boy.
Fantastic. So, yeah, obviously the opening cue of a film is quite an important one, because it sets a lot of your ideas and the direction that you're wanting to go musically. For me, one of the details I love about this cue is that bouncy 5/8 rhythm that's just got a lovely sort of energy to it. It feels very natural. It doesn't feel self-conscious. I'm doing an odd time signature. It just has this lovely feel to it. So I'd love to hear about, your thoughts on how you approach that cue.
A lot of these ideas that come to my mind, I think, are unconscious. They're sort of, in a way, sort of a natural response to the material. The 5/8 rhythm, because I am fascinated, and if not slightly obsessed with odd time signatures, they tend to come up naturally. And in this case, I guess that was my brain thinking about a slow-mo movement of a horse, the grace of that, the fact that it has symmetry and yet it sort of gallops in a slightly perhaps beautiful asymmetrical pattern. And I guess it was sort of, that missing heartbeat of the usual 6/8 rhythm, I suppose one often associates with horse riding. I just felt that that was a slow, it sort of was putting this layer of tempo and energy that was gentle and subtle, creating a sense of anticipation behind the main theme articulated on the cello, which was based on sort of partly consciously and I think a bit unconsciously on plain song chant, because the family are Catholics. And from being from Ballarat myself and growing up, not as a Catholic, but in a similar culture, Church of England, we used to sing plain song psalms, or otherwise known as sort of Gregorian chant type psalm singing in school choirs. So I guess all that sort of Ballarat childhood influence in me sort of came out in the score in that sort of melody, which I wanted to sort of give it a sort of a gentle, heroic fanfare quality that had a sort of a spiritual basis to it.
That we'll talk about it in the final cue. You actually used the text from the Latin Mass, from the Agnus Dei, which I assume sort of connects with all of that sort of background, does it? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually learned music in a Catholic convent from nuns. And so it also, I sort of used to hear nuns singing, and I went to Mass a few times because I loved the music. I actually liked the traditional church music really struck me here, even though I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm religious, but I certainly, it sort of definitely affects my heart, and I can see how it sort of is a cathartic portal, if you like, for people to access sort of a feeling of calm and comfort and inspiration. And so I did utilize that as a device in this score, particularly because of the father. Michelle's father was very religious and would have said those. In fact, I think he did say, he talked about, God being there and giving it quite a sort of a divine, sort of sacred experience of the importance of timing and the grace and the restraint and discipline and presence required to be a good horse racer. I just found those sort of ideas, not being a horse racing fan myself, but I found those ideas very inspiring.
Yeah, so obviously, as you mentioned, this cue introduces the main theme. Now, this theme you use in a lot of different ways throughout the whole film score, and in several different time signatures. And I guess in some ways, being quite a simple theme, did that sort of then lend itself better to actually be able to pull it in different directions as you went?
Yeah. Look, I mean, film scoring is a gig. It's a service we provide, as well as a responsibility and a professional function. But at the same time, I think as a composer, you can still have a bit of fun. And in fact, if your fun is not sort of ego-driven, but genuinely a sense of playfulness and exploration of coming up with variations on a theme, which you have to do because you need to keep re-articulating your main theme. In this case, the cello theme at the opening cue we just heard is replicated and developed into all sorts of different, and it sort of undergoes an evolution throughout the score. And that's usually how I work. And I guess there was a gentle femininity about it too, which I forgot to mention, hence the female choirs. And I use female voices texturally as well, because, the film is about female empowerment, and it's more about a woman succeeding in a man's world than it is about horse racing, really, even though horse racing is just the metaphor for that story. And it shows all the struggles a young woman went through. So I guess all those things that rattle around in my head too, in trying to keep the repeated theme fresh and help it evolve with her as she grows up from a young girl to a woman. Well, that's.
Well, obviously the film was directed by Rachel Griffiths, who's a very well-known and revered Australian actress, and this was her first feature film, I believe. Do you think maybe she was putting some of her story in there as well?
Oh,
Or?
undoubtedly. I think she would have been in her way. I mean, I think with what's happening and has been happening with the Me Too movement and the exposure of a male-dominated culture and the negativity of that in various guises, I think you would have to have a woman at the helm. And I mean, you had a female director, you had a female editor. And I felt honoured as a man to be asked to help tell the story. And even though from a different gender perspective, I was honoured to feel that I was given, was trusted in the role of articulating that journey. And I took it very seriously and was really grateful for that opportunity.
Yep.
Rachel's lovely to work with too. She's such a humble, articulate, down-to-earth person. And really, she gave me so much creative freedom and responded to the things, we had great dialogues about her thoughts on the score and, things like adding the Irish element of the tin whistle in there to give it, but to do, just finding the right balance of that so it wasn't tokenistic and sort of jingoistic. It was actually just became a subtle colour, a sort of the soul of there was something very earthy and sort of pastoral and country, had a feeling of the countryside around Ballarat too.
Yeah, I mean, while we're sort of talking about the sounds that you used, because obviously you set up the sound really nicely in that opening theme, and the way you chose to record the orchestra in this film, it gave it a very intimate feel, I felt. Particularly those solo woodwinds were really prominent. It didn't sound like a flute player sitting up the back of the orchestra. And the use of the shakuhachi, or you can tell us about that. Was it actually a shakuhachi, or yeah? Can you maybe tell us a bit about the instruments and that sort of thing and how you recorded it?
Yeah, well, sometimes I did use. I used a flute, clarinet. But when I use the shakuhachi, I've got this virtual instrument, which they've just fluked it incredibly. I mean, I've worked with one of the great shakuhachi players of the world, Riley Lee, and I feel sort of bad that timing and necessity didn't give us a chance to collaborate because he was in Sydney, and this was all done in Melbourne. But I just love this sound. I actually did a commission for Riley and a string quartet. It was a composition for shakuhachi and string quartet. And so in my quest to try and experiment with the sound as a writing tool, I found this virtual shakuhachi, which is just extraordinary. It's just, sometimes they get it right with these virtual instruments. They really get something that's happens to be super expressive. And this sound is so good. I use it often, not even going for a Japanese effect, but using it as a very breathy, interesting flute tone amongst everything sometimes. And I use it in the mock-ups and quite often leave it in there because if it's doing the job, I stick with that.
Right. Yeah, no, I've got to say I'm surprised because it sounds amazing. And I wouldn't have picked it for a virtual instrument. So we talked a little bit about working with Rachel. What do you feel are some of the most important things to establish in a relationship with a director? Because obviously often, unless you've already done films with a director, it's a new relationship and you've got to get that relationship up and running ASAP in order to create this effective creative partnership. What do you sort of see as those, important things to do initially to get that relationship really working?
Well, I think it's really, because music is such a complex and in many ways it's an intimidating art in the context of film making, because it's so abstract and so subjective. To describe a piece of music before it's been written is complicated, particularly when in most cases the director, not in all cases, but in many cases, they're not musically trained, and even when they are, even talking to other musicians, then that's even we have different subjective biases that are attached to the words we use to describe the ideas we have. So I think the important thing is to the thing I liked about Rachel and many of the directors I've worked with is they are very honest about not being, when they're not sure about what they want, and she was very trusting to say, she said to me, look, you know, I know the kind of things I want the score to do, but I don't know, you know, I leave it to you to figure out how to do that. And so I think we had a very, very fruitful relationship because of the honesty when instead of any of us trying to pretend that you can be accurately forecasting what the score is going to do, you can have an idea of where you want to go and what you wanted to achieve. But in the end, I was lucky enough to have that relationship with her and with many of the directors I've worked with. And I think it's important for you both to feel comfortable and honest rather than try and pretend that you know when you don't, because sometimes you know what you're doing when you're scoring a film but I think most times you either don't know what you're doing or it's actually difficult to talk about it accurately, because by the time you've written the score, it takes on its own life and then you have to revise it. And it's very much an organic evolutionary process.
Yeah, the number of times you say to a director, oh, I know how I'm going to do this scene, we're going to do it like this and this and that, and then you get writing and you're like, no, out the window.
Correct.
So actually, how did you come to sort of hook up with Rachel and get on the project?
Well, look, it like a lot of them, they just mysteriously turn up suddenly,
right,
and
yeah.
they were fairly advanced in post-production. They'd already they were towards a sort of a close to final cut. That they were still fiddling with it, and I just got a phone call out of the blue. Actually, my manager did. And it was from Jill Bilcock, a friend of mine who's a wonderful editor I've worked with on several films. And she was consulting with them, and she was one of the editors on the film working with Maria, the main editor. And so she actually contacted me and set up a meeting invited me to a screening, and that's when I met Rachel at the screening. I was sort of, because she's such a well-known actress and a world star, I was a little bit nervous about meeting her at first, but she was so disarming and so self-effacing and natural and down to earth, and she instantly put me at my ease, which gave me the ability at that screen. And I loved the film. I thought the film was very sweet, and even in its raw state was clearly something that was appealing to me and I wanted to work on. So I guess she sensed my keenness and my genuine response to the story. And I was surprised, it came out of the blue, and I can't really tell you how it happened, but it just, 1 week I didn't know what I was doing. The next week I was scoring this film.
Right, awesome. Yeah, to me, it was probably a big risk at the time, but I feel like it was an absolute masterstroke how they used Michelle's actual brother to play himself in the film, and which a lot of people would be like, no, don't do that. Don't get a real person, But that enabled them, of course, then to intercut between him as an actor to actual footage of from the actual race, and it was seamless because he was playing himself. And I thought it just tied a lot of things together. It made it feel much more real. So shall we listen to another piece from the film, shall we? I'm going to play 3 Kilos No Way. Now, this is interesting because on iTunes, I don't know if you know this, David, but on iTunes, this is listed as the most popular track on the album.
Yay.
In terms of, I guess, purchases on iTunes. Even more than the opening titles and the final cue, which when you look at film scores on iTunes, normally it's, the first cue's got the biggest popularity bar. So do you want to tell us a little bit about this cue and then I'll play it?
Yeah, well, this cue was one of the there was 2 or 3 comedic sort of montages about, and this cue was about Michelle's. She is such a dynamo of doing everything, and of course she was the bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, and so, but she was so determined. She was such a passionate and disciplined trainer for so she still put work first to the point where she was running late for her wedding. And so 3 kilos no waiting is a montage where first she says, sure, I can lose 3 kilos by the end of this week. And so she trains madly to lose all the weight. And on the wedding day, she realized, gee, I've got to be at my sister's wedding. And she goes and gets the dress and gets it on in the car and scrambles to run into the church late for her own sister's wedding. And so this is setting up a little bit of showing the energy of her training regime and the kind of haphazard but delightful, chaotic life that she led. So that's what I was trying to capture there. They're just sort of the fun and the energy of the Michelle training crazy week.
Mm. And this cue featured a couple of solo violins, didn't it? It sort of had a folky solo violin sort of feel to it. So yeah, let's have a listen.
3 kilos, no way.
Easy.
Great.
Thanks.
What terrific conditions we have here today, folks. We've got a fine young filly, a great and a terrific young stallion. But seriously, we gather here to unite these 2 people in matrimony. Their decision to marry has not been taken lightly. And today, they publicly declare their private love and devotion.
So that was the tin whistle you were talking about, that you sort of...
Yeah. So he was an amazing player. He's actually, his name's Misha, and he's not an Irish person, but he's an incredible tin whistle player that I found in Melbourne at the last minute. And and he composes his own quite complicated music for tin whistle, and he just came in and just nailed everything. I sent him all the parts. I wrote that particular part. I wrote out for him, and the sort of notes I wanted him to play, and he dutifully played them. And he said, "Now, would you like to hear something that's a little bit more idiomatic of the Irish tin whistle style?" And I said, "Sure." And that's what he played. Right. I said, "Wow. Okay, that's great." And he he put all these little idiomatic grace notes and things in there that unless you play the instrument, it's hard to know exactly how to articulate those, even though I tried in my mind to do it. But he just played that, something he'd sort of roughly worked out and sort of improvised a little bit as well, based on the melody. And it blended in perfectly. So I was delighted. It was one of those moments of surprise when the score goes to it, gets like another little bit of icing on the cake that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, no, it's really nice when a player brings some extra magic to the piece. And writing all of those little grace notes in it can make it all a little bit mechanical sometimes for the player, can't it? When we get to the back end of the film, so this is where the score really, I guess, all comes together. And 2 cues to me that really sum that up are well, they're the final two cues in the soundtrack. I'm not sure if they're the actual final two cues in the film, but we got Welcome to Flemington and then The Big Race, First Lady. So let's just quickly talk about Welcome to Flemington first, because I guess, and you know, like I said, I don't know a lot about horse racing, but I imagine Flemington is like the Wembley Stadium of the horse racing world, particularly this side of the world. And it feels to me like you were really playing to that grandeur of Flemington as like a sacred turf for horse racing enthusiasts.
Correct. I mean, it is a sacred turf. It's like arriving at the Oscars. It's like she's walking up the green carpet as opposed to the red carpet. She's arriving at the biggest moment of her life, something that she's been dreaming of all her life. So I wanted to, again, you know, it's a re-articulation of her theme, but then there's a new energy to it. There's a complexity of rhythm that's enfolded within the fabric of the scene, not to sort of, to help. I was trying to sort of, this is her heart dancing on the inside. This is her spirit soaring. This is her achieving her life ambition from when she was a young girl. So I try to encapsulate that in something that was sort of charming, festive, like an award ceremony, something that was quite grand and celebratory and fanfare-like, but at the same time keep the femininity and the excitement on the inside and keep a sort of a sophistication and an elegance to it, the music as well, to try and balance it.
Well, I think we'll have a listen to it because, like as you said, that end section, there's a lot of time signature changes and there's this lovely energy to it, but it all feels very natural and doesn't feel forced. So, yeah, let's have a listen.
Hi, Therese. Yes, I've eaten. A Barocca and a Coke Zero. That does so count. Okay, bye. Patrick. Hi. Don't go too early. I know. I got it. Thanks. Bye.
Could you tell me what the odds are on Prince of Penzance, please?
Here we go, short and sweet, but yeah, there's a lot going on there, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's fanfares, it's excitement, it's and I guess the unpredictability of the rhythm, the and that, you know, jumping from seven groups of seven to groups of five and threes. Sort of, I like playing with the unpredictability of the rhythm, so that it was sort of a bit of a happy, but sort of it's sort of blending order and chaos, having the jumbled rhythms being not so jumbled and having a structure to them. I like doing things like that, and this seemed like the right thing to do as she was walking in and her heart was fluttering, and it's go with the pictures. And you know, look, it's funny because I discuss all these things academically and it feels a bit funny to talk about it in words, because I'm sure at the time a lot of these decisions I'm just doing without thinking, sort of unconsciously. But yeah, I guess that's what was going through my mind when I was writing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's music theory essentially, isn't it? It's something sounds great, something works, and then people sit around and try and work out why did it sound so good.
Exactly.
And then, of course, in the final cue, the big race, it was a little while since I saw the film, but from memory, there was a part in the race, and correct me if I'm wrong here, where they basically sort of almost went silent and just featured the music, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was very powerful. And, you know, it's a movie, obviously, a moving race, and it's a culmination of her incredible struggles that she'd been through her life, and just to get to that point. So obviously I can't play the whole cue because it's like 8 minutes long or something. So I'm just going to dive in somewhere in the middle, and hopefully we'll hit that point where that wonderful theme just comes back in all of its glory.
Suddenly, a gap opens. And that's God talking to you, and you better listen to God, because he will close that gap quicker than you can say your mother's name.
You found it, little girl. Criterion trying to find a way through. Round the outside came Sky Hunter and Bondi Beach off the track is making round two. Now Ivanhoe waiting for a run down on the inside as they bunch up around the turn. That fame game is got to the extreme outside with the offer. Big Orange first behind the excess knowledge. Snow Sky joining in, and now Trip to Paris is coming. They're followed then by Who Shot the Marmot going for a run on the inside as our Ivanhoe. Coming past the 300 metres, excess knowledge went to the lead narrowly. Here's Prince of Penzance coming on down the outside. Prince of Penzance from Michelle Payne. Now Max Dynamite starts to charge home. Prince of Penzance from Max Dynamite. Prince of Penzance, it's history at Flemington. Michelle Payne. Michelle Payne has created history at Flemington, the first lady to win the Melbourne Cup.
Prince of Penzance, a horse that's been dogged by injury.
And of course, I'd love to play more because it's a beautiful cue from end to end. I love the way that you sort of went into this lovely, almost slow-mo 4/4 sort of thing. There's shades of that pop music influence in there as well, isn't there? There's some programming in there that could be from a John Farnham track.
Yeah, well, I wanted to, because of the images and everyone on stage, it was a populist moment of celebration, and I want to get this feeling of community. We'd come from the race itself, which was an inner journey, and the music draws you in with the Agnus Dei, which of course is Latin for Lamb of God, and is sort of about sacrifice. It's about it's the sacrificial sacrament in the Catholic Church. So she had sacrificed so much of her, and gone through so much suffering to get to this point where she actually achieved history, the first woman to win the Melbourne Cup. And so that moment of when she crosses the line, and that's the climax of the choir, and you get that high D, which I wasn't sure whether it'd be comfortable or sound beautiful, but when the young lady, Georgia, who sung that note, gave us all goosebumps, and we realized that's very special. So we wanted to create that feeling of spiritual climax that then goes into the celebration of the people around her, all her friends. And that's why I sort of wanted to have that sort of pop feeling as well, where it feels now we've come back down to earth and we're celebrating a monumental achievement. And that's why I put in a bit of chugging, bass guitar in there, and sort of more contemporary sounding pop drum feeling in the orchestral drums, just to get that feeling of community and community celebration.
Yeah, no, it works beautifully. And I remember having chills in the film. Yeah, thank you very much for your time, David. It's been really interesting to listen and hear about it and hear about your thought processes, behind weaving together a film score, because it's people like yourself make it look easy, but it's not. Composing a whole film score to make it work across an hour and a half, 2 hours of a film is a very to do it well is very difficult. And like I said, you make it look easy.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Cliff. Thank you for your kind words and your insightful questions too. You certainly knew, obviously you worked with me on this, and it's great to actually debrief on it and to talk about it and to hear your perspective on what how you saw the music and the sort of questions you wanted to ask in there too was really helpful, and a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much.